Welcome to the Firebase Workshop by SIT Geeks. Our agenda for today comprises of the workspace setup, Firebase Authentication, and Firebase Firestore. Our learning objective for today is to understand and apply the basics of Firebase features, to secure your application with Firebase Authentication, and to store and retrieve data from Firebase Firestore. The system architecture of Firebase is different from that of traditional ones. In traditional applications, the client will go through servers to either go to the DBMS or the cloud. However, for Firebase applications, the client will just directly go to Firebase itself. Our host activity is to clone the repo. So first, you have to accept the invitation, fork, and then clone the repository of GitHub.
Alright, so we're going to continue with our next activity, alright? So next up, we're going to go with Firebase setup, okay? So from here on, I'd like you to head over to console.firebase.google.com. Yeah, it sounds very long, right? But yeah, head over to console.firebase.google.com. From here on, add a new project. Okay? Everyone else done? Then once you're done with this, right, so when you create this application itself, then you have to include the individual titles. Yeah, please work together with me, yeah? So while I'm talking, please continue to press. Okay, so right here, you include your title for your project. Any name will do. You can name it anything you want to, all right? Yeah, just make sure it's not nasty in case you want to propose. Let's say you want to host your website, some funny name come up. Yep. Then from there on, you have to, you can like disable, let's say, the Google Analytics itself. This is optional. You may not need to do it. Then once you have that, then you have to configure, let's say, when you see this green word right here, right, it shows that your project is ready. Then we can carry on with the workshop. So yeah, please continue with this section. All right, it seems like you guys are done with, let's say, your application. So right here, right, we can continue with the registering of your application together with the GitHub to Firebase itself. All right, here. Give me a moment. Okay, so let's begin from here. So go head over to Firebase itself. Then from here on, you select the project settings. Within the project settings, scroll all the way to the bottom. That's where the web icon is. And then key in your application name itself. Any name will do, all right? So once you have that, right, then you can click on register your application. So this is allow Firebase to know what your web page is, and like, for example, to know how you're going to send information to Firebase. So your web page itself will then make use of this to send information to Firebase to register for your authentication gateway as well as your database. Okay, so from here, then just copy this whole chunk of text here. This Firebase config, this whole section right here, just copy it, and then head over to your Visual Studio Code where our repository is, and then just paste it inside. So yeah, just head over to where you have cloned the repository and paste it in. Okay, yeah, just open SRC under client folder SRC, then Firebase config. Up here, yeah, Firebase config. Yep. So within Firebase config, then you paste in within this section itself, the text here. So for those of you who are experienced with, let's say, coding or any like developers itself, right, you will know that you will probably ask this question, all right? So is it safe for me to expose my API keys like this? All right, so later on, we're going to do some basic settings for you to secure Firebase Firestore data to ensure that only authenticated users can make changes to the database, okay? So it is safe to show your, let's say, API keys, okay? All right. All right, so for those of you who are done with, let's say, the Firebase config itself. All right, so for those of you who are done with your Firebase config, please try to okay, so cd to your client directory, then perform npm install. All right. Yeah, this step may take a while to work. Yeah, so once npm install is done itself, please run npm start. All right. Okay, anybody else here still running the npm commands right here? All right, can see. Yeah, please remember to cd to the client directory, all right? Because your node folders is within the client directory.
So like once all of you have set up, right? Now we will understand like what is Firebase. Can go back to there. Okay, so basically Firebase is a platform where it's developed by Google and is used by developers. And developers often use the tools to build quality mobile or web application. Then from there, it also provides availability where your data is hosted on cloud and access anywhere that you want. So from here, right, you can see we are focusing on authentication and Firestore database. And for today's workshop, performance is to get insights on latency performance and also where your application allows users like us to collect data and analyze from there. So for the dashboard is for analytics where users actually use it for similar to Google Analytics, so you can collect insights where your users come from and which region are they from. Then including A and B testing, and also cloud
A/B testing.
A/B testing,
Hey.
and also cloud messaging. So cloud messaging is a very interesting features where you actually have able to send notification on mobile application. So next. So the biggest question is why you use Firebase? So have you ever think that when you use a project and you're cooperating with a group of friends to do on a project, you have to share files across your friends. And a lot of times data will not be on cloud. So using Firebase actually hosts the data on cloud for you and your friends can access from there directly. And all of you can actually set up a team, then you probably like have multiple data on Firebase, and then from there, all your friends from different teams, right? They are able to access by logging in their credentials. So now, for the authentication part is where we allow secure authentication for sign-in and also supporting email authentication, social media authentication such as Google, Facebook, GitHub, and Twitter. So today we'll focus more on email/passwords. So to add and authenticate users for login, and our task for today is to add users to the email/password sign-in method. And these are the clues for you, and you can start now.
All right. So, how do you know that? Let's say, for example, your authentication gateway has, successfully created, right? So once you have registered your application with Firebase itself, then you run your React web page. And when you run the web page itself, if you can key in, let's say, the username and the password that you have created on Firebase Authentication, it means that your web page has successfully connected with Firebase Gateway. All right. Alright, since that most of you guys have completed with the activity itself, so let's say, for example, if you're at the page, right? Let's say when you log in successfully and you're directed to the home page, you'll see this whole big chunk of table of data right there. That is data that is within React right now. It's not data from Firebase, alright? So this thing is actually hard-coded at the moment. So once you've successfully configured your Firestore database later on, then you'll be able to see data that is fetched from React. Fetched from Firebase. My bad. All right, so right now I'm going to go through the solution for activity 1, okay? So once you guys have completed this activity itself, you will understand that, let's say, for example, when you successfully register your application with Firebase, you will be able to send and receive information directly. So the first part, the config portion, was what we have done. So to register it already, then you can receive information. So some things to highlight right here. So I walked around, I observed how you guys have done it. So some mistakes or some things to take note of would be, let's say, for example, when you're going to run npm install, please remember to cd into the client directory to run npm install. So the package log config should not be in the root folder. It should be within Firebase because all our dependencies has already been installed. So all you're going to do is just run npm install and it will fetch all the dependencies for you. All right. So other thing that I noticed would be like, let's say for example, some of you guys will have, let's say, your configurations wrong, or like you just copy and paste the whole configuration. That's perfectly okay, but do make sure that, like we already have some set of configuration inside already. So just try not to overwrite whatever that's inside. All right. So from here on, move on to Firebase Data Store, okay? So today we're going to cover a little bit on Firebase Data Store. This is, let's say to share, let's say, anybody here got any experience in SQL, any database experience? Database experience. Okay, good. So over here, anybody no database experience? Okay, then what? The rest of you guys never raised hand means got experience, no experience, or no, unsure? All right, I'm going to assume that you guys know nothing about Firebase or know nothing about any database, all right? It's okay. It's cool. Okay, so Firebase or like Firestore is a NoSQL database. So essentially, let's say if you think of storing of information, here we have a picture that says like, let's say collection, document, and data. All right, so what is a collection and what is a document and what is data? So simple analogy is, let's say for example, you have a car inventory. All right, your car inventory will be your collection. All right, so within set itself, right, you have, let's say, individual cars who are individual documents. All right, so you have an inventory of cars, you have individual cars inside, and there is a document. And within each, like what is data then? Which will be, let's say, your car color. What's the color of the car? What is, let's say, your model of a car? All those things fall under, let's say, your individual data. All right, so this is how Firebase is like. So if you were to relate it to, let's say, SQL, your collection itself will be your table, whereas your document will be, let's say, your individual
Rows.
Okay, rows. All right. Document itself will be individual rows, and your data will be, let's say, individual fields. Let's say your car model, for example. Okay. So these are the three things that we have covered for now. All right. Oh, okay. So you must say this. Okay. Thank you. My bad. I'll move back here. All right. So most importantly, data models include collections which can be used to group the documents and is represented as the table in a traditional SQL. So it's identified by name and also your, what's this?
It's a lightweight.
Yeah, it's a lightweight record as well as the unit. So the unit of each individual storage is called a document, all right? Then document is represented as the row and field in the column, and also has multiple data structures to help you organize your data. So data types that are frequently used to store your data will be, let's say, your arrays, your booleans, and as well as your strings. So take note, in Firestore, your integer values are called number. Okay, let's continue. Oops. Well, my bad. Okay, so this is usually how you store information within the Firestore itself. All right, so this one, just to make sure that I'm technically correct, I will read through whatever I've written, all right? Yeah, so this one must be accurate in case I teach you guys wrong things. All right, so data structure provides you ways for you to organize the data. So let's say you have your data can be nested in documents. Is it too small? Okay, all right, so the data can be stored in, let's say, individual documents. So let's say you have a name, where your first name, your last name, where you're born. All these individual can be stored within one document. So there are cases where you can store your data for, so let's say if you have nested data in documents, you will have simple fixed lists of data that you want to keep within a document. This is easy for streamlined work process. All right. So other ways to store it will be, let's say, your sub-collections. So you have your main collection where you have, let's say, big header, science. And within it, you have your software, your users, and let's say astrophysics. So individual collections itself will be a sub-collection of the main topic. Okay? Then the last one will be root level of storage. Sorry, so root level collections itself will be to ensure that they are good for many-to-many relationships. So some data, let's say for example, I can have one person can have multiple phones, for example. So this is like one-to-many relationship. But let's say in a group size to phones, you have one group with many people and many relationships, many phones. All right, next. Oh well, this is huge. All right, so why Firebase Firestore? All right, so important thing. I'm sure you guys have heard of, let's say, MySQL or let's say MongoDB and stuff itself. So Firebase Firebase Firestore and also MongoDB is one of the implementations of NoSQL. So NoSQL is essentially a way where your data is essentially stored in, let's say, in columns, in documents, and ways that you can store it in each individual data. So they're usually in a JSON format. All right. So essentially, so let me continue. All right. So why Firebase over this sort of thing then? So Firebase provides support for multiple different platforms. As you can see here, it supports iOS, Android, web development, C++, Unity, Node, Java, Python. So while Mongo does support all this stuff itself, Firebase has its own individual built-in features. Let's say your authentication gateway, let's say your push notifications, which are very helpful for mobile applications. So while MongoDB, on the other hand, will only focus solely on storing of information, Firebase comes with additional features that allows you to build your application. So for this itself, I'll recommend, let's say, Firebase for the medium or small size projects, which I think most of us will be doing it in school. All right, so I think that will be useful. So for bigger projects with more scalability itself, then maybe MongoDB will be preferred. All right. So activity 2, Firebase CRUD. All right, so for those who are very familiar with code itself, this activity will be a piece of cake for you. All right, but for this case itself, to make sure that our workshop can cater to anybody who is tech and non-tech itself, we have simplified the process such that all you got to do is just look through the repository, paste your information, and you can run. All right, so before I begin itself, please head over to Firebase Firestore. Yeah, there's two different databases. So there's one real-time database, there's one Firestore. So head over to Firestore, and make sure to set your region to Asia, Southeast Asia 1. Yeah, don't put the wrong place. Southeast Asia 2 is in Jakarta. Southeast Asia 1 is in Singapore. All right, so if your data comes back, take a long time, it will be different. All right, so next part will be to set your Firebase database Firestore rules. So this rules itself over here, if you look over at the screen itself, is to ensure that only authenticated users can write. Of course, this is a very basic rule. If those who understand code will know that. So does it mean that anybody who is authenticated can write? Does it mean that I can write, let's say, Jasmine's entry? Well, yes, but this is just a very basic rule for us to keep the workshop going. For those who are interested in, let's say, a more complicated set of rules itself, you can always try to change it such that you can only be interacted by the users themselves. Okay? Yeah, so head over to Firebase console, Firestore rules. Change the rules to the following. Right, so heads up. So one thing important will be, let's say, for example, when you're creating your Firestore, right? There will be a section that requires you to, they will ask you want to create in production mode or in test mode. Just pick in test mode, and then once you're in itself, replace the rules with whatever we have written right here. Okay? Yeah. Activity 2, all right? So firstly is to create a collection. So within your database, remember the user account that you have created just now? There's a user ID column on the right side. So create a collection with that user ID and follow the format of how we have generated the data. Do take note that the document ID for this is auto-generated. All right, but please match the individual fields, the caps of how the fields is created. So let's say, for example, contact number, capital N, please follow the capital N for each individual fields. Just follow accordingly to how this is. And then once you have created this successfully itself, your data should show up on, let's say, your web page that we have. All right? I think there's a bit of confusion as to what collection ID should you guys use, right? So when you created your user account, there's a username as password, right? Under the username password field in the authentication. On the right side, there's this whole chunk of random hash, which is your user ID. Use that as your collection ID.
We will show you where to get the hash, okay?
All right, this is where your user ID will be found, all right? So use this as your collection ID.
For the start date and end date, right, it must be timestamp instead of string. Yeah.
Right. So I think most of you guys are already done with the activity itself. So let's say when you go to the home page, when you refresh, right, the data you have created will be shown. Let's say when you refresh your web page, if you have done it correctly. All right, so I see some of you guys are still inserting data in progress. That's okay. So we have time. We still have some buffer time as we continue to our next activity for you to insert your data. So next part to activity 2 would be CRUD to Firebase. So this activity is simple. All you gotta do is just to spot. Just in the case, let's say I give you one simple hint for how to complete this activity, would be that you have to look through individual files within the repository itself and look for a to-do. All right, so all you got to do is to update itself and then to create a new booking and to edit booking and to delete booking. So if you have that right, correct, you just need to copy the functions and you just need to call it within the individual page itself. So the two pages that you need to look for would be your home page and your booking, I think it's create booking model. You just look through, look for the to-do, and then just paste the function call inside. All right. Then once the activity is complete, right? Once you are able to edit, create, or update your Firebase collections. All right. All right. I had a feedback from my teammate here that says that I sound a bit confusing. Apologies. All right. So open up your file directory, look for home.js and create booking model.js. All right. Within there are several functions at about the middle to the top of the page. And then look for the function within the hint.md. So there's a file inside it called hint.md, which contains the function call. So all you got to do is to call these functions within home of create booking models. All right. This is a very simple activity. All right, everyone, I'm going to go through the solution for activity 2 itself. All right. So, right, for those who have not completed the activity itself, is okay. So we're going to go through a bit of just showcase how you can find the individual functions. All right. So if we look at this screen itself, the functions names itself is within hint.md. All right. I included this hint.md inside for those to look for the function calls. So next up, after we selected this functions itself, we just look for the functions, and then we can then scroll into individual folders. Let's say I have this edit booking, right? So within edit booking itself, all I got to do is just to scroll down to this section which is called edit booking, and then I just paste the function here. It's a very simple activity. Okay. So for those who have not completed it, it's perfectly okay. All right. So next up, just copy the rest of the functions to the respective places where they state the to-do. All right, so if so, those tech people might be asking me, why am I just copying and pasting a function? So I'm going to give a bit of technical explanation. So for those, yeah, just hope that you can just explain a little bit on how the code works, all right? Okay, so I'm going to bring up util here. Yeah, just slide this thing over. Okay, it does not show. All right, so a bit of technical explanation here will be, let's say, for example, the individual functions that we have wrapped around. So Firebase actually created code snippets for us to make use of, for us to interact with its own individual Firestore itself. So as you can see here, right, we have wrapped some functions for you guys, and all you got to do is just to call the functions. So this will be a simple solution for you to implement, let's say, for example, in your individual project. Okay, so each individual functions, all we got to do is to, let's say, for here, I check the user ID. So when the user is authenticated itself, I'm able to retrieve the user ID from the session. And then here, then we'll move down to calling the individual collections. So how do I look for collections then? Remember there's this section that I get you guys to map your user ID to the collection ID, correct? So using that, I'm able to find the collection that exists within Firestore. Okay, let me just zoom in a little bit because it's a bit tiny. All right, so once we find a collection, which is the user ID that we have created itself, we can then create a new booking. So all you're going to do is just to find the document reference, which is let's say the collection. So find the collection already. Once the collection is found, we will create a document from here and then input the booking info. So developers will ask, let's say, for example, where is the document ID? All right, so you guys have not input any document ID, but you're able to create a new booking, right? So over here, you'll see that, let's say, if you do not input any document ID within this field itself, document ID will be automatically generated. So if we move down to, let's say, edit booking, all right? So edit booking here requires me to input a document ID, all right? This is to allow me to find the individual collections, and then with the document ID, I can then edit the field that I've edited, all right? So it literally says edit field with the new value that it has in it, all right? So it's actually quite intuitive in this case, because it's like, yeah. So next up would be, let's say, for example, if I want to delete a booking itself, all I got to do is just to look for the document, select the document, and then delete the document. Yeah, essentially just delete document. Okay, so that is for activity 2. Okay, so let's continue. All right, so solution itself is just, look for hint.md, copy the individual functions to where you're supposed to call it, and then you call it. All right. So additional information, all right. So for example, if let's say you are performing Firestore, like information like interacting with Firestore itself, do make sure that you can input this thing called app check. So app check essentially helps you to verify individual connections to ensure that your web page is accessed only from your application and not from anywhere else. So usually Firebase will whitelist, let's say, local hosts or let's say your devices where you have right there. But if you are hosting it on a production, in a production mode, you will not be able to access any of the APIs. So app checks allows to help you verify your individual application information. So this is where you can read up on it, all right? But we'll not cover it here today. All right, so bonus, hosting a web page. All right, so I guess have a bit of time. So we can try to run through the video shortly, all right? So hosting a web page essentially allows you to host a web page directly on Firebase itself using GitHub Actions. All right, so let's see. All right, this will not be an activity, but we will just showcase to you how it can run. All right, so head over to Firebase hosting itself. So once you're at Firebase hosting, you have to set up Firebase hosting, all right? So you got to key in the following, let's say, for example, to run like global Firebase tools itself. So in your command line itself, run this function, as you run this statement, which is to npm install global Firebase tools. So once you have the section up itself, we will then continue to move on to your terminal. Okay, I'm going to zoom in a bit. The video should zoom in a bit. It's a bit small. Zoom. Okay, cannot. All right, so once you have that, right, once you finish the function itself, it will perform an installation in your npm node modules within your computer itself. So once you have that, you have to log in your Firebase using your terminal. And when you log into your Firebase using your terminal itself, you can then access the page. So it will prompt you something, all right, which is to authenticate itself. So if you are already logged in, yeah, it will show as you're logged in. Then next up will be to initialize Firebase in your account and within your local repository. So what happens here is that, let's say when you init itself, it will tell you what you want to do. Let's say you can do authentication, you can do hosting. Yeah, it will show you a chunk of commands that you can do with it, all right? So over here, you can see here at the bottom of the page, which will be the individual functions that you can set up with Firebase. Let's say to run through real-time Firebase, to do Firestore. Or in this case, we have checked hosting with GitHub Actions, all right? Okay, so once we have checked this section, right, they will then prompt us into what we're supposed to do with this. So if that, let's say, for example, your directory that you're supposed to create, which in this case, we're using build, because we're going to run npm build on our GitHub Actions. And then with that, you have to input, let's say, for example, is this a single page web page, which React is a single page web application, right? Then with that itself, you can then continue from here. Sorry, to copy up the link. All right, so I do that because this is a bit faster. All right, so you go to your web page itself. Okay, so once you have this, you copy in the URL of the page, your GitHub repository that you have logged itself. So using the username and the username and the repository name here, you can then input here into Firebase. All right. So once you have that inside, they will then know which repository are they supposed to insert the secret to. So once they have generated the secret itself, they will then check for service account on Firebase, which is the Firebase account that you have logged in prior, which is using the Firebase login command. All right. So here, next up will be, let's say, for example, to set up workflow on your GitHub Actions. So they will essentially generate for you automated YML files that's available. So using this YML files itself, all you got to do is just to commit to this repository, and Firebase will automatically deploy your web page for you. All right? Yeah, that's pretty cool, I guess. All right, so once you set up your individual like automatic deployment itself, then the individual web pages will be like the web page that you see on your local machine will then be hosted on Firebase. Okay, so this video will be sent to all of you guys later on at the end of the workshop. So for those who are interested to host your own web page using GitHub Actions, this is one way you can do it. All right. Huh? Okay, so if so, I think that the web page that we have created is actually hosted. Give me one moment. Huh? All right, so the page that we have created itself is actually hosted here already. Different monitors. All right, so this is actually the application that we have created here. Let's say, for example, we have made this on Firebase hosting. All right, so I should be able to log in, I think. Yeah. All right, this is the individual collections that is showing up. All right, so as you can see here, the URL here is actually on Firebase.